Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Talk FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. New year, new vid. Well, not quite, but, close enough. Thanks, time zones. But it's time for the Righteous Prince, Yamato Takeru, a new SSR 5-star. Limited Saber unit. I wrote that as Saber Limited Unit in my show notes, and that was this weekend, so I don't know if I meant to do that. Anyway, Unwanted, this is a video series I do on this channel where we look at a FGO unit's real-life history and folklore, their lore and fate, their mechanics, and more, so that you can get a comprehensive picture about whether or not you want to be rolling, maybe remind you of things you didn't know, and hopefully give you a good time. Also, hey, there's no way to dodge this one. There's spoilers for Fate Samurai Remnant inside. We're back to the old reveal the name of the servant in FGO right away problem. It's been even more years since Samurai Remnant came out in English than to get to this point in FGO English, but yeah, there's gonna be spoilers. Sorry, I can't. That's not my fault, guys. It's just how they made the game. And so we begin at the history section of the show. Yamato Takeru, also known as Prince Oosu, is a semi-legendary figure from Japanese history mythology, generally considered, based on the histories, to be the son of Emperor Keiko, who is marked as the 12th Emperor of Japan, ruling from roughly 70 to 130 CE. Yes, those numbers start in the double digits. Also, immediate aside, on the subject of double digits, as a complete aside that is not necessarily one that's relevant, but while he is pseudo-historical, it is amazing that we can specifically single out Prince Oosu because Emperor Keiko allegedly had 80 children between 2 wives and several concubines. His son and successor, Emperor Seimu, had no direct descendants, and allegedly the next emperor, Chuai, was the son of Yamato Takeru. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So, we don't really know much about his early life, but according to the dates we have from the Nihon Shoki and the Kojiki, which are our primary sources about this, the major works of historical myth in Japan, the Prince Oosu was born sometime around 72 CE and died sometime around 114 CE. The legends state that he had a fearsome temperament, which worried his father, the emperor. At some point he killed his brother, also known as Oosu, but written slightly differently. I guess when you have 80 kids, you reuse some names. So in order to keep distance, the emperor sent the prince to fight rebels in Kumaso, which seems like it translates roughly as the bear-punching tribe. They were in mostly southern Kyushu, and the namesake of the modern Kumamoto province, and also later sent the prince to the Izumo province. This is where we get some of our first anecdotes about the prince, said to have defeated one of the Kumaso by exchanging swords before a duel, and the prince gave them a wooden sword, so, he got a real sword, the other guy got a wooden one. In another story, he ambushed the Kumaso leaders dressed as a maidservant while they were drinking, and then according to these texts, vaguely, he defeated several deities. During this period, one of the prince's enemies gave him the title Yamato Takeru, the Brave of Yamato. Now, interestingly enough, how this is spelled in kanji differs between the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, but the meaning is still the same. They just wrote it with slightly different characters. Anyway, his father was still a little freaked out by this lad, so he sent him to the east, vaguely, to defeat rebels and wild deities which didn't submit to the imperial court. At this period, Takeru visited the Aisei Grand Shrine, the senior-most shrine of Amaterasu Omikami, to visit his aunt, Yamato Hime no Mikoto, who was both the high priestess of the temple and also founded the shrine. She was the one who said it needed to be done. According to the stories, Takeru grieved that his father apparently kept sending him on suicide missions, and out of compassion, Yamato Hime lent him the Ame no Murokoma, the cloud-parting sword, which Susanoo had received from, under the tail of the Yamato no Orochi, gifted to Amaterasu, that whole deal of the founding sequence of Japan. And then, in the Kojiki, there are several listed myths about and legends about his expedition to the east. First of all, there's the story of his first wife, Ota Tachibana Hime, who sacrificed herself during a storm at sea to calm the anger of the sea god, move their passage on. That's a fairly important one in this context. He is said to have defeated the local god of Ashigara Pass. Yes, that one. The one around Mount Ashigaru, where Kintoki is from. He and a local old man are said to have composed the first Sedoka poem in Kai province. Yes, that Kai. Sedoka is a form of waka poem where the pattern is 577-577. And probably the most famous anecdote from this period, an enemy attempts to trap Takeru by burning him alive on an open grassland, lure him out to a grass field, light it on fire behind him, kind of surround him in flames. So, desperately, he draws the Murakumo to try and cut the grass and stop the fire, and discovers it has the power to command the wind. So, using fire strikers, which he also got from his aunt, he fans the flames hotter, redirects them towards his enemies, and then renamed it the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, the name you're probably more familiar with. After all of this, Yamato Takeru returns to central Japan, marries Miyazuhime, but is said to have challenged the god of Mount Ibuki, but didn't bring his sword for some reason. Tuck that one away for later. And so, supposedly, the god cursed him and he died, approximately in the 43rd year of Emperor Keiko's reign. After his death, his soul is said to have turned into a great white bird, and then the imperial mausoleum in the Aisei province dedicated to him is known as the Mausoleum of the White Plover, which is a type of bird, a plover. Note that all of that above is supposed to be the version that's in the Kojiki, which is supposed to be the older and more loyal retelling of the legend. The version in the Nihon Shoki is, I don't want to say cleaned up, especially since I'm not literally referencing these side by side. Watch this video like 5 million times so I can, buy copies and stick them on my shelves. But the Shoki version is said to have had a good relationship with his father. So, pick whichever one you like. I think the Kojiki version being older is generally what FGO and Samurai Remnant's working with. So, Miyazuhime collected his belongings and venerated them first in her home until they were relocated to Atsuta Shrine, which is where the Kusanagi is supposed to be enshrined, and deifies the 5 great gods of Atsuta, which includes Amaterasu, Susanoo, Yamato Takeru, and Miyazuhime among them. Because his soul was transformed into a bird, Takeru is sometimes worshipped as the Otori-sama, the great bird, and there are Otori shrines dotting all of Japan. And in November, there's a festival known as the Tori no Ichi, the Market of the Bird, which is pretty popular. You get a bunch of stalls and other celebrations going on. So in addition to Atsuta, you can find major shrines like Kanasana and Yaizu, dedicated to Yamato Takeru. The Hanazono Shrine in Tokyo also has a very famous Tori no Ichi festival, though it is primarily an Inari shrine, but obviously Yamato Takeru is still a big deal in the history and spirituality of Japan. And Yamato Takeru is not unknown as a pop culture figure. He's appeared a couple times in Atlas games. There's a boss he can be in SMT4. It's the evolved version of Naoto's Persona in P4. Those 4s, huh? The One Piece character is definitely named as a reference. There was an award-winning fantasy novel trilogy known as the Jade Trilogy in Japan, which was first published in the 80s. The 3rd book is not available in English. Don't know how that one worked out. But it's a retelling of Yamato Takeru's legend, so there is a lot of still pop cultural reference. Not quite as grippy as, we've talked about with, Takeda Shingen and Usagi Kenshin, but still there. And I did at least find some sources where some mythologists did make a comparison between Yamato Takeru and King Arthur, though, some of the exact theorists are talking about stuff like, oh, they're both from a Proto-Iranian source. That's probably bunk. But it's not something we haven't heard before, so it is one of those moments where you can kind of go, oh yeah, other people have noticed that some of these things are interestingly similar. Now, while I did use that as a segue, I should note that Takeru's FGO profile actually explicitly states that they are not a saber face with the MHX seal of approval. They are, however, truly gender ambiguous. Gender, yes. Official gender is question marks. They have both the feminine and pretty boy traits, and for simplicity, we'll be using they, them, but you could interpret that as who give a shit, because Saber doesn't correct anyone, assuming they're female in Samurai Remnant, doesn't really discuss their own gender. Nobody really brings it up. Other than an androgynous appearance, which befits anybody in Fate who has a single cross-dressing anecdote, it's a pattern, it's happened a lot, Yamato Takeru truly is, like the legendary format, they're a cheerful killing machine, describing themselves as a person who cannot change, a relic from a mythological age where fighting humans, yokai, and gods is all too common. So, Yamato Takeru is the saber in the Waxing Moon Grail War of Samurai Remnant, is Miyamoto Yori's servant. FGO is not afraid to reference it directly, as Takeru recalls basically every character who appeared there in FGO, has dialogue with everybody. Now, since Takeru is basically the, and I'm using scare quotes in my script here, the Japanese King Arthur, they give them the full treatment. A Mana Burst Water, which is, a divine water NP to hide the fact that they have the Kusanagi, because it is also definitely one of the world's top 10 most famous mythical swords, much like Excalibur. When its true name is released, it can fire a big beam of water as the 8 currents raging storm, which is basically Ibuki Doji's technique. It's not the sword's true power, but it's pretty good. Curiously, we do use the water focus of Ibuki here. This could just be kind of like a brand continuity, though I might also reference, because Takeru was the one who renamed it, we're still using the older form. They received the original Ame no Murakumo. Just as a complete aside, would love to see a Saber Tamamo wielding the Kusanagi, which is wind and lightning or wind and fire themed. Freest real estate in the world, FGO. Also, fun note, I think I mentioned this earlier in the script. If I didn't, I'm bringing it up now. You can write Takeru's name multiple ways. Again, means the same thing, spelled differently between the two. Because FGO and Fate in general is borrowing mostly from the text of the Kojiki, the older one, they spell Takeru's name that way, with those kanji. And obviously Takeru was a playable character in Fate Samurai Remnant first, and while Takeru will be a New Year's servant, they are a bonus servant in the Samurai Remnant collab event, Waxing Moon Clashing Swords. This should give them some FGO-specific backstory, and also if you want to know more, you can play the damn game. It's been out for years. And now into mechanics. So, a saber, but blue, or AZURE, if you will. Takeru has relatively high attack and lower HP, seems about right. QAABB, it's 1 quick, 2 arts, 2 busters, the iconic saber deck, with average hits and relatively low NP gain. You'll see why in a second. The first reason is that they have an AoE arts NP, which is like 8 hits, and it also has a basically guaranteed chance to reduce the targeted enemy's arts resistance by 50% for 1 turn first. It's not exactly switching to a single target, but it still makes it pretty good for bosses, and the overcharge effect is defense down for 3 turns, so stackable. All of that does mean that you're getting some pretty decent NP refund out of that. First skill is a 1x 3 turns, 1k to 3k guts, a 20 to 30% battery, and a special on death buff. But not for them, because while this buff is active, again, assuming I'm reading this description right, but when an ally is defeated, Takeru gets 25% NP. So, yeah, very funny delayed buff. Second skill is a very expected trait damage. It's 30 to 50% damage up versus both divine and demonic enemies for 3 turns, and then is also a 20 to 30% crit up for 3 turns. Not a huge crit up, but, something besides just the damage trait on the off chance you're not fighting those things. The final skill is the aforementioned Mana Burst Water. It's a 20 to 30% arts up for 3, a 10 to 20% NP damage up for 3, and is another 10 to 20% battery. That's right, you got a lot of batteries on this guy. Passives are just Magic Resistance A for a little debuff, Writing A so that 1 quick actually does something, and then Divinity D for a little bit of bonus damage, just a little bit. So this should be pretty obvious if you've been playing FGO at all, but we made an Art Loot Saber. 50% battery, multiple damage buffs, reduces enemies' arts resistance, and then does defense down for the grind set. Takeru does have a fairly unique design space in that with 2 possibly overlapping, there are some demonic divine servants and bosses, but 2 big damage traits, and the weird single target NP effect means that while they probably won't match a full single target servant, they can do a lot of damage in the case of a boss wave where one guy is bigger than the others, and this is good for both farming and story. We are here to click blue buttons and go brr. Your team comp should be blisteringly simple. Arts go brr. You want to slot in some combination of Castoria, Tamamo, and Lady Avalon, which exactly will depend on what your goal is. Takeru doesn't actually have attack up, so by default, defense up is basically attack up, but that only procs after, you do the NP anyway, so yeah. Castoria's attack up is useful. That's more damage, stacked on. And you can get NP damage up on Takeru without needing to use Tamamo's buff there. But Tamamo also has, healings and skill cooldown reductions on top of that. That said, all of the blue card gang really helps out because other than the guts, Takeru doesn't really have any hard defenses. So, whether that's healing, max HP up, invuls, etc. are all very useful. Budget art supports are also very common and really simple to use. You can use Paracelsus for extra guts and, some single focus on the arts. Caskill really helps out because he gives you defense up, lots of arts up, and also has that huge star gen buff, which you can actually utilize for critting. Now, your CE selection here is going to depend a little bit on what you're doing. You got a self 50, so you can do any 50%er like Golden Sumo, or another which is boosting, NP and arts as well. There's a few different combinations of that. And you can basically leave the rest to looping. Or you could go for 0% and assume that you're just going to make up your 50% either on Takeru or with double Castoria. You've got some room here depending on what you're aiming for and how big you need to make your damage numbers. Now, Takeru's going to like overall CE effects of damage and arts up, maybe a little bit of crits up as a treat. Funnily enough, often not the case for these sorts of servants, Takeru doesn't really care about overcharge levels unless you're defeating a boss with break bars, where the defense up needs to stick. If you're doing 3-turn farming, these guys are not sticking around. I mean, maybe you'll do like a Brave Chain if they have a huge HP up and the defense up matters a little bit, but the odds that the overcharge effect is going to matter if you're not digging in for several turns versus the same guy is going to be pretty low. So let's move to the vaunted other stuff. So Ascension should be pretty easy. All the mats are pretty straightforward. You've got a few different ones of them, but going to take some fairly common stuff. Skills are pretty cool right up to the level 9. That level takes 72 Twilight Swords per skill, so I hope you were farming during the lotto. Other than that, everything should be, like I said, fairly straightforward. Now, funnily enough, Takeru is fairly rare. This New Year's banner is basically the only time they're going to have a solo banner to themselves so far. We don't really know what FGO is doing in the future, but yeah, it's pretty open-ended. The remaining banners so far are just all what will be, I should say, for us, 2027's rush of rotations like Weekly Saber and Grand Duel Saber. I would probably expect like one more added in 26 by EN, but that's not a guarantee. They have been pretty good about bringing some extra banners in so that, there's not a dead year before the big rush. But it is still kind of open-ended. Obviously, limited units get put in all GSSR formats, so you can watch out for that. But yeah, that's Yamato Takeru, and that's the last wanted of 25 / the first wanted of 26. Happy New Year, everybody. Have fun. Buy Samurai Remnant. Unlike all the light novels that FGO is an advertisement for, you can actually do that. That's nice. Check out the podcast if you want to see how things are going. Also, want to apologize if the audio level of this particular video sounds slightly off. It's so freaking cold here that I have literally every sort of fan-type device turned off, so the white noise audio floor in my room is a lot lower than it normally is, so sometimes it sounds a little weird and loud talking into the microphone, so I'm like, oh shit, I'm loud. So if I'm not actually loud, and I just think that because I normally have 4,000 fans going, that's my bad, sorry. We tried to boost it up a little, but we're just kind of doing it on the fly. Anyway, that's wanted. If you're watching this video at home, give us a like, consider leaving a comment, join our Discord. We did say that during the new year, we're going to start hosting movie nights in Discord pretty regularly. We're going to try and do that every Saturday, I think was the plan. So joining the Discord's a cool time if you haven't already. Make sure you're subbed so you're always getting videos like wanted. Ring that bell. Consider joining our channel memberships and consider supporting us on Patreon like some lovely folks I'm going to shout out in a second after our musical outro. But you could have gotten this episode early. Really helps us out. You can do annual memberships on Patreon if you want to just, fire and forget for a whole year. Could do that. Or you can hit us month by month if you're feeling like it. But yeah, that's going to be it for 2025. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next year. Haha. The joke is that this video is probably going to go live at 11 o'clock at night or something, so, it'll be the next year in EST anyway in like an hour. Did you get it? Did you get the joke? Anyway, outro. This is just a reminder that this episode is brought to you by our patrons like Adam DeHarp, Blacklist OG, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, JD1000, Chris Starlight, Rise of Kenji, Rogue Robin, and Sharvor, and many more. Thank you for your support, everybody. If you want to see us do more, consider supporting us on Patreon. Bye-bye.